All right, hello, fellow coders. Welcome back to this next lesson inside of the FreshVotes series, where we are building a real-world Java web app from scratch, leveraging technologies like Spring Boot. Now, in this video, we're going to be continuing our conversation around Bootstrap. So I started in the previous video talking about Bootstrap and the grid system that it has, trying to illustrate the grid system with code, as well as these bars at the top of the screen. So the next thing I want to talk about is I'd set the, so this is a form, what I've highlighted, the stuff below the ugly boxes at the top here. The stuff here is inside of a form, and I've said I want it to be 6 columns in width, which is essentially all the way to this black, the end of this black bar and the beginning of the green bar right here, about halfway across the screen. But obviously, as you can see, it's not stretching out all the way. So why is that, and do we care? Well, you don't necessarily have to care about the fact that it's not stretching out. It's not stretching out because we have some defaults here as to the size of the span or the text area here, as well as the text input here. There's just defaults as in terms of the size of the text area, but or the text box, I should say. So the text box or the input type text here, I think, in my opinion, should be wider because usernames, specifically email addresses, can be a little bit lengthy. So as you can see, there's not enough width here. So how would you go about making it wider? Well, you could just manually go in there and find the text box, where it's text area. Where is it? Right, here's the label. Here, input type text. It's kind of wrapped into 2 lines, kind of silly, like this. We could say, style width equals, 50 EM or something like that. And then we go back and refresh, and boom, it makes it 50 EMs. But there's 2 things that happen here. One is that was cumbersome. We trying to figure out, the exact width is annoying. And 2, it's blown past our filter in terms of how wide you want it to be. So that's kind of weird, right? We just broke Bootstrap. Well, there is a better way to handle this situation, and it's not by assigning width specifically. Okay, we've already sort of done that inside of the div class row and column. Well, specifically inside the column. So we never should have to explicitly say how wide we want something to be when we use Bootstrap. So this is not the way to go. So then obviously you will ask, well, what is the right way to go then? Well, the right way to go is to look at the where is it? Components. Yes, input group. Is that what I usually do? Yeah, so there's examples of input groups and how to leverage them. Or is it forms? No, it's forms. Apologies. Input group is the advanced step once you've gotten forms down. So input groups, you can group together like an @ symbol with a text area, or there's different things that you can do here. But forms, my apologies, forms are what we want. So as you can see here, in this form, we have an email address, and the email here spans the entire width of this box. But as we shrink, as we shrink the width of the browser, you'll see that the width of the text box is matching the width of the browser. So that's kind of nice. We kind of want that to behave in that way. So how can we do that? This is why I got confused between input group. You specify a form group, okay? So form group, input group. So one of the things that I struggled with first learning Bootstrap is just remembering all of the different terminologies that they use, all the different classes specifically that they use, and how to properly leverage them and use them together. It's definitely a bit of a learning curve, but that's why I always come back here. I rely on the documentation. I come back to this documentation frequently to just sort of copy paste their examples and then make it work the way I want it to. So one thing I will say that I don't like about this is the label is on top of the text area or text box. I don't like that. I want to be beside it like I have over here. I want the username and the text box to be beside each other. So is there another example of that? Well, no, these are again below and above. I don't like that. Let's see, that's an input file. This is saying you can create larger inputs, default or smaller form inputs. That's kind of nice to know that you can do that in terms of sizing. Here we go. We have them on the same line. It's illustrating read-only here, but as you can see, the way that they assign this code is a little bit different. There's also something called an inline form, which is being demonstrated right here. Okay, so how can we use this stuff? So I think what we want to do is, this one looks good in terms of the example that I want to use, except for the read-only part. I don't really care about read-only, which is what they're showing or showcasing right here. But specifically, they're saying the form group and row are on the same div, whereas up here, I don't think they were. If we go to the example up top, yeah, doesn't say form group row, it just says form group. Okay, so over here we're saying form group row, we want all this stuff to appear on the same row, specifically the static email and then the div class text area. So that's sort of how we can get around or get by, using what it is that we want to use here. So what we do is, for our inputs, we can specify them as being on their own form group row. Okay. So how can we do this? Yes. So we can create a div class equals form group row. Okay, and then our stuff will go inside of it. All right. Well, now one thing to note is they do not use p tags to wrap their stuff. In the example, there are no p tags. In other words, paragraph tags. So we can actually remove those paragraph tags. We don't need them. Okay. Next thing they do is in the label, we have a class called column sm2. Oh, I forgot to mention the differences between. Anyway, I'll have to talk about those in a moment. But really, all we care about is column, and that takes up 2 columns. And this one is a column form label. Okay, so they're bringing in another. So there's 2 different classes here. One is here, which is saying use 2 columns in width, and then there's another one here, which is, hey, turn this into a form label. Okay, so first thing I'm going to do is, for this label, I'm going to define a class. And I'm going to call this a form label, and I'm going to say that it should take up maybe 2 columns. Okay? Note that I didn't say column sm2. I will explain that later. And then we have a div class, a div that wraps the input type text. So this is the other thing that kind of made things a little bit strange for me. We're assigning the width of a column inside the label here, but then we're assigning the column width in the div for the input type. So there's a bit of a mismatch there. I don't know why they don't have this label wrapped in a div. I'm sure there's a good reason for it, but in terms of usability and remembering, it was like, oh yeah, do I wrap that in a div or do I not wrap that in div? So that's sort of the headaches that come along with this framework, the Bootstrap framework. But you get used to it with use, right? It's not intuitive, but over time you get used to it, and you should be able to remember how to use it. So here we're going to assign this to be 10 columns in width, okay? And then we have our input type, and the input type has a class of form control plain text. Now that's probably because it's using a read-only, that it's making it plain text, whereas I don't think we want to do that for... we don't want to make it plain text here. We want to use form control. That's the right class that I would normally use, which makes it behave like a normal input type text box. So I will assign a class of form control. Is there anything else? No. So it's a div class that wraps the input. The div class assigns the width of the column, and then the class inside is called form control for our text box. So now let's go ahead and refresh our screen and see what messed up, if anything. Okay, good. Excellent. That's what I expected to see. Let me also get rid of the error message, just because it's kind of annoying to see an error message there. So as you can see now, our box, our text box, got bigger. It got wider. But note that it stopped at the 6-column width that is sort of the parent constraint that it has. So although I said, hey, for this div row form group, make it 2 columns in width here and 10 columns in width here, you might have expected it to be 2 columns here, and then this might have gone all the way across the screen to make up the rest of the 10 columns. But that's actually not what's happening here. I wish there was a way to illustrate this visually. But basically this button, the button with the username label, these two take up 12 columns of the parent row, whatever column that it's working, that it exists inside of. The parent is right here with these two boxes in terms of the width anyway. The width is 6 columns. And I can prove to you that it's being constrained by the parent because you can nest these things. You can nest grids inside of grids inside of grids. If I were to change the parent, this is the parent that's dictating the width, if I change this one to be 8 and refresh, you see that it goes to 8. Right? So this username is still just 2 in terms of the columns, and then the text box or text area, whatever you want to call it, spans 8 now instead of 6. Okay? So that is what's happening because that's the parent. The parent row and column is right here. That is what's dictating. If I go to column 9, it'll get a little bit wider. Okay? Just to show you what's going on. We have a grid inside of a grid. Okay? So now let's mimic this markup, this Bootstrap stuff. Let's mimic it with our password. Okay, so let's create a div class equals row form group row. Okay, remember to put the space. These are two classes. One class is row, the other class is form group. 2 classes. Okay, that's why we need a space. Don't do form group hyphen row because that's just one class, and this class probably doesn't exist. Form group row as one class probably doesn't exist. But form group exists and row exists. So we're using 2 classes to modify the contents inside of this div, which will be a couple of, well, it won't be p tags. We'll get rid of this. And I was like, where's the input box? Here it is. It's wrapped inside. So we have a label and we have an input box. Okay. And now what do we do? Well, for our labels, we assign a class of column, however wide we want it to be, as well as the form label class. Okay, 2 different classes. One is telling it how wide to be. The other is telling it how to make itself look, because it's going to look a little bit different, or at least going to behave a little differently. And then this guy, the class, and also note, you can put the class wherever you want inside of the element. I just happen to put it as the second part, the property, but you could take this class, and this class could be over here. It could be at the end if you wanted to. It's completely up to you. It doesn't matter where you put it inside of the element. Just want to make sure I said that out loud, because sometimes people don't know these things, and I assume you know them, but I should never assume you know anything. That's what makes me a decent teacher, is I don't assume that you know anything. Oh, by the way, this is not how you do it. See what I was about to do? I was going to say form control and then call it completed. But no, this is that silly thing that I always forget. The column definition for the inputs need to be specified on their own div. Okay, super annoying, but that's just the way life is sometimes. So now the username and the password behave as we expect them to. They take sort of 6 columns in length in terms of the parent columns. It's 12 columns in total for these guys, but they're 12 columns inside of 6 columns. Again, a grid inside of a grid. And then let's do the exact same thing to our buttons here. I think we can just say div class row, and I think we can say div class column, 6, and div class column 6. So the point also to remember is for each row there needs to be 12 columns. Okay, that's why I'm able to do 6 and 6 again. It's because I added a new row. Up here, this form group row, a row defines the fact that there can be 12 columns. And I'm creating 12 columns with 2 here and 10 here. Look, there's another row, 2 and 10. There's another row, 6 and 6. These always add up to 12. If you don't, so here's another row. See how this is the parent row, and then there are child rows inside of the parent, because this guy here is nested inside of this guy. I created a parent row here, and I have a column of 6 that ends here, but then I don't define another column 6, which is okay. You don't have to just say class equals column 6 with nothing inside of it, right? You might want to do that to close out the 12, but that's actually not necessary. It will understand the difference. It will understand that, you know, there's no other, inside of this row, there's no other columns, so therefore they must be empty, right? So it'll figure that out. Okay, so here's one thing that is annoying. So I forget about this with buttons. So with the buttons, I have a row and a column 6 and a column 6. So you might have assumed that these would appear nicely, but you see how the create account is sort of floating in the middle? I was expecting it to be on the right-hand side, but that makes sense as to why it's here. Because from the beginning of the login button to the beginning of the create account button is 6 columns inside of the parent, right? Because what's the halfway point between these two bars? So let me change the bars to be even 4, 4, and 4. No, because that won't be. Let me do 3 and 3 and 6. So that way, these two things will the gray area will take up more space, and it should go to right about there to be halfway. Yeah, so that's about halfway. So now you can see. I'm trying to use these to illustrate. I guess I can copy paste this as well below this row here to illustrate the same picture below. You can see how the login button, there's a bit of padding, and then the login button starts and it ends there, and then there's a bit of padding and the create account starts here, right? So this is the 3 column, you know, I could even, I could probably have text in here, span, style, color is white, and then I say call -3. Is that gonna work? Yeah, and then I should text align center to make it centered. Oops, did I save? Text align center. How come that didn't work? Text align content center. This always happens. I can never center things sometimes. Maybe the spans you can't center. Maybe it needs to be a div for it to be centered. Yes, only divs you can center. God, it's so annoying trying to remember that stuff. And then can I say head? No, I'd like to make this. Can I say this is like an H3 or something? Just to make it bigger. There you go. And we can even add a little bit of, you know, top padding to be, you know, 1M or something like that, just to make it. There you go. Look at that. Beautiful. And then we can take this guy and say this is column 3 columns, and then this is 6 columns. Just so you can visually see 3 columns, 3 columns, 6 columns, right? So you see the login button and the create account button. We said for this to be 6 inside of the parent, and the parent is these 2 3 column guys. So to be centered inside of the 6 columns here, the center between the 2 is about this point. So that's what's happening, and that makes sense as to why that's happening. That's why the create account button was not aligned to the right. You need to tell it to align that create account button to the right, okay? Or you can get fancy with some padding of the columns or whatever. You can add some empty columns, but anyway, that's kind of annoying. I think the better thing to do is to align it to the right. And I forget now off the top of my head what the how to align it, what the way to do that is. So let's look at aligning image layout alignment. So this is helpful to you. There's a search box here, the documentation. You could type that stuff in. That's what I just did. Top align media, center align media, bottom align media. So probably center. We can take a look at this. Align self center. We might be able to say align self right, although we're not necessarily using media here. These are buttons. But let's see what happens if I say align self right for this button. Let's see if that works. No, it didn't work. Okay, so some of the classes work for only specific things. Like this is, it says media because it is media. This is an image, okay? Let's see, how do we, media list? No. So this is all for, this is the media object. Align, text alignment, layout, components alignment. Let's see, alignment, change the alignment of pagination. Pagination, justify. So those are justify content center. I don't think that will work. Justify content end. No, that's not going to work. again, ladies and gentlemen, this is the way of the programmer. This is the reason why I include this stuff in my videos of what you see right here, is because this is what I use. This is the mindset that I use when I am programming. So it's important for you to see this. I stand by the fact that this is important for you to see how it is that I go about solving problems in the real world, because this is what a real programmer does, right? They test stuff out. I tried TextWrite, it didn't work. So the next thing I would probably do is just give in and go to Google, say Bootstrap for align button right. Okay, align button to the right. There you go. Stack Overflow. Bootstrap 4 classes uses float right as opposed to pull right in Bootstrap 3. Also, don't forget to properly nest your rows with columns. So row, here's a class column. Again, I'll get into what these mean, the stuff inside between the column and the number. Right now, you haven't seen anything like LG or SM or whatever. I will explain those probably in the next video because this one is now going long. But you can see float right. That's the class that I should be using. So instead of text right, it should be float right. Refresh. And there you go. Now the button has moved over to the right side of the screen. And as you make the screen bigger, those buttons should align themselves nicely. Now, what happens if this happens? Look, our buttons are colliding with each other. Okay, so this is the perfect segue into those letters that I talked about between the column and the number. This is what we're going to have to use in this case. But that'll have to be for the next video. So I look forward to seeing you there. As always, take care of yourself. Happy learning, and bye for now.